And when you finish with that, I suppose you're gonna fly, huh?
Hey guys, welcome to the Rugby Bricks podcast. My name is Peter Breen, founder of Rugby Bricks and also host of this new Rugby Bricks podcast. Now, I do just want to talk about that music intro that you just listened to and the reason behind it. Growing up, my favorite movie was Space Jam and had a famous basketballer, Michael Jordan, in it, and also a famous character from the Looney Tunes, Bugs Bunny. So all that combination went together and still is one of my favorite movies to sit down and watch. Kids, if you haven't seen it, go out there and watch some Space Jam action. I've been listening to podcasts for about 2 years now, and I find them hugely valuable because I'm someone who cannot sit still. I have to be doing two things at once. That's why with these podcasts, you can be doing the dishes, you can be walking the dog, you can be driving to and from work, or even mid-gym session, you're there, you're sweaty, you're working hard, and still be taking in some knowledge, getting some little gems and little bits of gold that you can apply to your life, what you're trying to achieve, a little bit of mindset and also goal setting, anything that you can pick up from these valuable guests that we're going to have on the podcast. I just want to get their knowledge all going through your ears. So with that, I really hope that you enjoy this podcast. Please share it as much as possible. We're trying to get the brand, the word, and the mentality out behind Rugby Bricks. So with that, enjoy the show. The Rugby Bricks podcast is all about speaking with some of the brightest minds, smartest coaches, and most talented athletes. We're breaking down their habits that have made them successful and sharing their insights with you guys. Today's guest is no different. Her name is Devin Markle. She has a huge focus for the mental game, mindset, and handling pressure. Devin is passionate about helping individuals reach their full potential. She earned her master's degree in counseling and sports psychology from Boston University. She's experienced working with athletes at every level, high school and college, all the way through to the Olympic and professional athletes. One thing that I'm really excited to talk to Devin about is her work with the NFL and NBA. I've got massive love for basketball, as you guys know, and she's worked with players, getting them ready for that NBA and NFL draft process. Now, these guys have to get ready. All these scouts come in, they're all watching the cameras, the press. They've got this massive pressure. 2 days to perform. Their testing has to be through the roof. They do this thing called the 40-yard dash, which is a massive highlight of the draft combine, and everyone's watching, the cameras are on, and your whole career basically rests on how fast you run that 40-yard dash. On another selfish note, Devin's been working with the Mamba Academy, which is Kobe Bryant. Yes, I mentioned that name, Kobe Bryant, where she works alongside him, working with those young athletes in the Mamba Academy. Now, Devin, welcome to the podcast. We have so much to get through. I'm so excited to speak with you today. As you can probably tell by my voice, I want to get a little bit of a background on you growing up, your sport. I know you've played a lot. And a little bit of a background about what you've been up to the last few weeks. The floor is yours.
Awesome. Thank you. I grew up just playing a ton of sports. I'm originally from Connecticut, so an East Coaster. So the cool thing about that over here is that we play a ton of sports because of the seasons. There's a point of the year where you want to go inside, a point of the year where you want to go outside. So I grew up playing every sport you could imagine. And by the time I got to high school, I started to kind of focus on really basketball, lacrosse, and I was a competitive equestrian. So I was kind of hitting the burnout of being an equestrian at that point. It started to become a job, unfortunately, instead of fun. And so I really focused on high school sports. I actually picked up a lacrosse stick as a freshman in high school, which is insanely late to the game for an East Coaster. They are like born with sticks in their hands. So picked it up and ran with that. And I was just really fortunate that, to me, that sport just clicked. But when it came time for college, I wanted to be, quote unquote, a regular kid, maybe not play sports and wake up at 5 a.m. But I found out really quick my freshman year of college, I was miserable not being part of a team or a sport. I found myself doing like 2-a-days by myself just to work out and go to the gym. And so I called in a coach who had recruited me, and I said, I think I messed up. Like, please take me back. I'll transfer. And she was great. She said, I'll take you back after you try out for the team at your school. And I was like, you're crazy. This is a Division I school. I've only played 4 seasons of lacrosse. She was like, that's the deal. And I was just like, okay, fine, whatever. And yeah, I trained for the rest of my freshman year, and I was really fortunate that I walked on my sophomore year. So I made the team there, and I stayed there, and I was in for a rude awakening, to be honest. I had gone from starting every game, playing every single game, and being an all-star to having my position be on left bench, like deep on the bench. And so to me, I was just kind of like, what is happening? Like, that part of the game had never been hard for me. And that was really cool because I was introduced to sports psychology there. So our team had 2 sports psychologists work with us as a team, and just mindset. And it was like a light bulb went off, like, how did I not think of my mindset?
So do you think
years?
that I've picked up on that straight away, how you mentioned about being on the bench. I'm just wondering whether you have had any thoughts about mindset or health and well-being before you've been chucked on the bench and left sitting.
I really hadn't. And to be honest, I think that's because I was lucky. Like, I had a really great high school experience with coaches. I hadn't had to hit that setback yet. So, now that's one thing I work with athletes on, is like, we don't have to work on mindset when something gets there. Unfortunately for me, it took to get to the bad to work on it. But I do wish I had prepared before, because maybe I wouldn't have, stayed in that position as long as I did.
Yeah, cool. And we're definitely going to come back to that, because we get a lot of messages, and it's so funny because I get the message from people all the time through Rugby Bricks of, I've been dropped, my coach isn't picking me, and it's like a panic state. But we are going to, I'll definitely come back to that. But what I want you to carry on with is, so you went through that experience, and then you got really interested in psychology and mindset. So what was your next step after that light bulb moment?
Yeah, I mean, I was fortunate that I was always drawn to psychology. I knew I wanted to be a psychologist since I was 16. So this kind of just put like the best of both worlds together. So from there, I applied to Boston University, which at the time was one of the very, very few schools who offered a master's in sports psychology and clinical counseling. And that was really important to me, because I think sometimes we think of sports psychology and we just think of the performance side, but we're whole humans. So whether we have anxiety or depression or family situations, I wanted to be able to treat athletes on the whole. So I went there and had a really great 2 years, worked with a ton of athletes. And following that, someone wanted to go into business in California, and I jumped at the chance to get out of the snow, and came out here and started a practice out here, which was great. And it was really cool to use everything I'd learned from sport into business. So again, it was one of those connecting moments for me. But really the turning point was when a huge facility opened up out here and asked us to come on board. And so for the past 3 years there, I've been the director of mindset development at Mamba Sports Academy. So that was really great, because I can't even list all the sports and athletes I got to work with. So it just opened up a window. And then from there, I needed a new challenge. And so for the past year, I've gone back to the private practice world to work more on the mental health side and continuing with athletes.
Fantastic. So I want to go back and touch on the Director of Mindset Development, as I believe what you call the title. So that that's obviously a broad title, and you mentioned about dealing with a lot of different sports and athletes. What were some of the highlights, or I guess moments, or people you worked with that you were like, this is great, I'm helping, I'm having an effect, even some success stories where you actually saw an outcome from the work that you were doing?
Yeah, some of my favorite work there was that we would work with agents so that we would have an 8-week pre-NBA and an 8-week pre-NFL draft training program. So a lot of people were like, why are you working with them? They're about to sign multi-million-dollar deals. Like, what could they need right now? And I just found that to be so interesting that we put even the elite in these kind of holes. Like, what would they need? We pigeonhole them. At the same time, most of those guys were 18 or 19 and had never had a job before. So some of my work was anywhere from interview prep or, with the NFL draft and combine, your 40-yard could be the most important 40-yard sprint you ever run in your life. And so when we think about the pressure we're putting on ourselves of, okay, now I have to get this time, that already sets us back. So a lot of my work was just about how we treat competition the same as we do as training. Instead of just going through the motions, we need to train with intention, and then we need to compete with intention. And I thought that was one of the coolest experiences there because, it's just a unique niche with that sport of like, your biggest tryout per se is not a game. It's skill based. So everyone's
it's so
out of their
crazy because just want to jump in on that because I've watched the combines and that. So that kind of is how it works. Because over here, I guess we have people that go around identifying talent, and as soon as your talent's been identified, you get asked, you may be contracted straight away. But for those athletes you work with, so that is the be all end all. Like, you turn up, you have to perform, and your 40-meter. Was it 40 meter or 40 yard?
40 yards.
40 yard dash has to be on point. So how do you prepare an athlete or a person to get ready for that mentally?
Yeah. So the first thing I always start with is how we talk to ourselves. And I'm not a rainbows and butterflies clinician. I want the best results just like my athletes. But if we think about it, there's been research that says we say upwards of 250 words per minute to ourselves, whether that's just like, I'm going to make this shot, man on my left, get back on D. It could be a variety of, just instructional to self-talk. So I really start with that right away, because if we say, I have to get a 4.75, okay, well, you instantly just put pressure on that by I have to. So we really pick that apart. So even just shifting it slightly to I will now lets you be in control versus it happening to you. So that's one of the biggest things that we start with is thought affects how we feel, and how we feel impacts our performance in sport. So it's that cycle we really want to start with.
Yeah, fantastic. And I love the point of changing just that simple word from I have to I will. And I guess, do you get people thinking about that with their training sessions and their gym sessions? Do you incorporate it straight away into something you can use every day and get better at and practice with?
Yeah, a lot of my athletes will then have like cue words. So we'll write it somewhere. Some will write it on their hands or their wrist so that we can just start to use that immediately. And then the other big one is imagery. I actually have them write out a script of, what that new experience will be like, so that, there's nothing like the combine where you're, TV cameras in your face and you're running a 40. Okay, let's write that out exactly how that's going to feel. The same thing goes a lot of times for like tryouts. A lot of people, that's a nerve-wracking one. So anything like that where we can prepare before it happens. But unfortunately, I think athletes, we forget like, oh, I don't actually have to wait for it to happen. I can prepare that way.
let's carry on down that track, because I
Yeah.
think that it's such an important thing for up and coming people preparing for a big game, a big tryout combine. I probably want to go get a little bit more detail on what would, if you were tasking someone to do that job. So we've got a big event coming up in, let's say, 4 weeks. With your imagery, what sort of detail should you go into with writing the script, as you called it?
Yeah. So the key here is that even though it's called visualization or imagery, is that it's vital to include all of your senses and also kinesthetics, because as athletes, that is that mind body connection for us. So I find a lot of times that's where people kind of go wrong, is they don't really get themselves into the moment as detailed as they could. And when I say write a script, I truly mean that. I have my athletes write about like a small paragraph, a short paragraph. Because if you read it over a few times, then you get that image that's clear and consistent, versus if I just said, okay, now go ahead and picture it right now, you might do great. In 5 minutes, there might be a completely different scenario. And when it comes to events, I have it get really specific. So, for example, some of my favorite clients is I have a beach volleyball team. And I love this because these guys are professional on the tour and they love imagery. And it's really about short, like screenshots, small parts of your game. So these guys actually wrote on note cards. They wrote their serve routine, their blocking. What else did they do? They did communication. So they made it like confidence. So they have like note cards of each script. And I love that because then they kind of use what they need that day, instead of sitting and picturing a whole match.
Yeah,
So
cool.
that's what I do.
That's that's absolutely perfect. And how you mentioned about it's not just there's a lot to it. There's a lot to think about writing the script and the information. That's great. What do you do with someone? And I think we all know these people in life, business, or sport. Someone who is just an absolute overthinker. So they've come to you for help. They love mindset. They do imagery. They've written scripts, and you're just like, oh my God, stop thinking. How do you do this? Because I've dealt with players, and a term that I've heard before, it's and coaching now, it's really easy to coach someone who's blissfully dumb. They don't overthink things. They don't have too many highs and lows. So moving down that track, when you're dealing with someone who does overthink, what are the strategies there? I know that that's a very broad question.
No, we've all been there. The term mindfulness gets thrown around a lot lately. But I think at its simplest, mindfulness is also about just being present focused. And if we think back to the times we've performed our best, it's when we're in the present. So really with those athletes is I try to slow them down and get them to just be more present, because otherwise we go to like the spiral. And really when people are kind of overthinking, it's because they're doing what we call mental time traveling. They're either going to the past of the last play, I should have, could have, would have, or the future. I need to get this point. I must do this. And when we're in either of those, especially in a high-paced team sport, we're missing the moment. And I think that's what happens is we start to carry that outside of the game, and then we overthink. So I really try to have athletes slow it down. And again, that's where really simple tactics, though, come in handy. So having a cue word, I have some, where they just write breathe, or one play at a time. I can't tell you how many people write that somewhere and look at that. So kind of focusing on that. And there's daily activities we can all do. One of my favorites is like when you wake up in the morning, count how many steps it takes you from your bed to your bathroom. You've probably done it millions of times, but we don't pay attention. Or for work, the minute you leave your driveway to the minute you're at your office, how many stoplights are there? Things like that we go mindlessly through.
I think that is such good advice. And as soon as you mentioned about the breathing before, a lot of the rugby teams over here, you actually see them after a try or a pressure moment, they come together and all as a team take 2 or 3 breaths. Like you can visually see it happening and the body's moving. And yeah, it's exactly that, isn't it? It's focusing on being present, focusing on a small little task, a bit of detail. And yeah, that's fantastic advice. I want to go now, jump into, I can see for those listening to the podcast, there's a surfboard in the background.
Yes.
And I just want to know about your surfing game and whether or not you're any good on a surfboard, because I am not. I can wakeboard behind a boat, but when it comes to surfing, my timing sucks. So, what's your surfing game like?
I'm going to be honest. It's been rough lately. I haven't been out there very much, so I can't really take too much credit for my surf game. But I did just have the pleasure of working with the USA surf team.
Oh, wow.
So that was pretty cool because that's huge news for that sport. Because it's about to be the first time it will ever be an Olympic sport at this next Summer Olympics.
Yeah,
So,
fantastic. Wow,
yeah.
I'm so
nothing in
pleased I
comparison
asked.
to them.
Yeah. They've got some good coaching there. I'm so pleased I've asked. Okay, let's talk about that. What's some of the work you've been doing with the surf team?
So they joined us at Mamba Sports Academy for kind of a day of training. Kobe Bryant was there to speak with them. They have the U.S. Olympic Committee has their own psychologists that work with them. And then I worked with them on some concussion testing to make sure that we do pre-testing so that, God forbid, anyone gets injured, we can get them back into the game faster. And that's been a piece of work that's kind of expanding into sports psychology, is the concussion work, because we see, unfortunately, a lot of it have impact on mental health with continuous concussions. So they were awesome. They were great. We worked on the way we do concussion baseline testing now is through some really cool technology, and they do it through reaction time. So we have them go through on a giant board. It's called a Dyna board, a 4x4. Athletes love it. It's a fun game, and they hit the lights as fast as they can, and basically that way we can test if reaction time decreases due to head injury. So that was kind of my piece with them.
Yeah, and so that's a big part of rugby now is the head injury testing. So
Yes.
Players actually get removed from the field, do a quick test. That's interesting that the light and reaction, is that kind of the main way that we now measure head injuries? Is that something that's done in competition or just something you track throughout a season?
And that we were actually very unique to be offering that. A lot of schools here do computer-based testing, but unfortunately, sometimes there's ways around that. I hate to admit it, but as an athlete, I know I had upperclassmen tell me, well, just click away so that, your score will be low. So if you get a concussion, you can still play. And, at 17, 18, I wanted to play really badly. So I bought into that. So that's what's really great about some of this other technology, is that there's no way to kind of quote cheat the system. So this gets us a more true baseline.
Yeah. And I think, concussion's a real thing, and a lot of course, rugby athletes, American football people you work with, it's such a common injury in the sport. So I guess the advice and the reason why athletes and people need to take it seriously. So let's say someone's had a concussion, they're dealing with really bad symptoms. If they do return to sport too fast, what are some of the complications in the short term and also the long term that can have an effect on someone, just so people are aware of the risks?
Yeah, I mean, the risks are pretty broad, and everyone's brain is different, is what the new research is kind of telling us, is that everyone's recovery is different, and we can't go like hit A will affect me the same as hit A will affect you. But with that, it's a broad from just initial nausea, headaches, an immediate kind of impact to long-term, which could be depression, anxiety, and down the line CTE. So I'm really cautious with it, and injured athletes is definitely an area I love to work with, because I think sometimes it's really hard for us, even if we only have to be pulled for a week, for us to be pulled at all is what we think of weakness, or we're upset because we're isolated. And that's something I've been trying to figure out too, as a way for us to have concussion protocol. A lot of times is really isolating. You're kind of told to just go in a room or go away from the team. So that's a big factor why people don't want to admit they have them. So if we can kind of let the athletes still be part of things in the recovery process.
Yeah, and the fear of missing an opportunity or a future contract, or those are all factors that come in, and we're all in such a rush with our sport. We all want to be there, right there, achieving it right now.
Exactly.
And don't want to miss the limited opportunities. You mentioned something that I want to go down the track of now. You mentioned, one, Kobe Bryant's name, who is my favorite player of all time. I'm a big Lakers man. And my followers certainly know my love for basketball, favorite movie, Space Jam. So one thing that when you sent through your email, how mentioned about the Nike Basketball Skills Academy.
Yeah.
So I want to go down some of the work you've done with basketball athletes, because it's something that I'm trying to get the mindset of into rugby athletes, because I love the mindset behind basketball of skill development day in, day out, dribble every day, shoot every day, play every day. Whereas in rugby, we kind of have too much of a just got to be right for said day, that type of mindset, and be fresh and ready. And the skill development isn't quite at the same level as what basketball athletes focus on. So I guess I want to go into that as two questions: is what was Kobe saying to the to the surf boys and girls, and also what is some of the work you've done with the Nike Basketball Skills Academy?
All right. Kobe's message is always the same, and it's clear, and it is like no days off. He's just one of the most driven guys I think I'll ever meet. And I think he had a really great message too. He spoke to some of the Olympic hopefuls and just told them, this is what you're focused on now, but in that playing for his country was one of his primes. So he was really great about that. And of course, he preaches Mamba mentality and mindset and taking care of, I think that was something I've heard him say to almost every group I've heard him speak to, is like, take care of the details, take care of the little things. We're always so focused on the outcome, or, once I make it to the finals. And he kind of really preaches to take care of the details in the meantime. And he definitely shows that through his coaching now. He coaches his daughter's team. And that's one of the fiercest little basketball teams I've ever seen. I tell everyone, do not mess with those little 12, 13-year-old girls. They do 2-a-days. They are dedicated. They do mindset. They do workouts. So they might be good role models for most of my athletes.
I love it. How old are those girls?
I think they're about 12 and 13 now.
Yeah, crazy.
Yep.
Isn't it funny? Like, so many coaches and parents are just putting these massive handbrakes on 12-year-olds to sort of that 16-year-old. Don't do too much. Don't overwork. It's funny. I see a massive difference between American sport mentality and almost the rest of the world with age.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things, though, to take away from that team is that, because people are like, oh, they work out so much or they train so much. That group of girls loves their sport. And that's my advice to any parent, is once it stops becoming a love or a passion, and of course there's going to be moments where it feels like hard work, but it shouldn't be work for a kid. And that's the difference. Those girls still love it. If pulling them off the court would be harder than putting them on the court. And I think that's a big one for any of my athletes. I've had pro guys who I've said, maybe this isn't for you, because if you're not enjoying what you're doing and have some spark of motivation, you can have all the talent in the world. This is going to be a long road. And that actually is what I work with Nike, with the Skills Academy camp. So that camp's for the top, around 15 to 20 high school kids and the top 15 to 20 college players from around the country, and they get invited for 3 days to participate in this camp. And the camp includes on-court skills, just amazing coaches there, NBA coaches, college coaches. It's pretty amazing. They also participate in yoga, spinning, recovery. So just learning how to take care of their bodies on the recovery side, which I think is so important. And then I also do mindset workshops with them. So we kind of have a curriculum over the last 3 years that we've gone over. So,
just on that, I love it, environments of, and I think you touched on it there with the NBA coaches and other coaches that are involved. It sounds like there's a real openness to sharing of ideas, and this is the knowledge I know, and just give, which is really cool and creates a really successful coaching staffs and environment and room for learning. I think a few coaches try to protect all their good stuff, and I don't think it's the right way to go, because when you give everything out, you just have to keep developing and learning new stuff. You mentioned there about the workshops you do. Can you explain a little bit more of when you get your hands on these athletes, what you start with and how that looks?
Yeah. So what's interesting is that I'm getting these guys who, some of them are teammates, some of them have never met before, and some of them are complete rivals. So it's a really interesting start. So usually on the first day I do goal setting. I'm a huge proponent for goal setting. I think it's oftentimes really overlooked skill. And I think we're really good at saying like, okay, well, I want to win my state championship. I want to win a national championship. But we forget the X's and O's to that point. So with that, I make the guys write out what their process goals are going to be over the next 4 days there. And three of those have to be mental goals and 3 have to be physical goals. So we put those together.
What's an example of that? Of those goals?
So like a physical goal could look like I'm going to take 20 extra free throws per day at camp. A mental goal could be I'm going to meet with the shooting coach for 10 minutes before each practice. So it doesn't always have to be mental, like a specific sports psychology skill or tool, but it's just building up that mental side of the game. So talking with coaches, watching game film, resetting your goals, things like that are all on the mental side. So that's one we do. This year we did do a few fun team building activities, because a lot of these guys are transitioning to new teams. That jump from high school to college, I want them to be able to go into that feel confident, but also know how to communicate with upperclassmen, be humble, but be hardworking. So we did some team building that way of how to jump in that gap. And those were a few of the activities we did.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds absolutely awesome, and I love the descriptions you're giving just with goal setting and team building and the why behind that. What's is there much in New Zealand? We've got a thing called tall poppy, which is cutting people down when someone else is really working hard, wanting to achieve their goals, putting in the work, that other teammates are like, well, I'm not prepared to give that amount of effort, so I'm just going to try bring you back and drag you back down. And do you see much of that happening? And if so, what are some of the coping stuff with that? Like, I know that surrounding yourself with successful people is always such a good thing to do. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts around that.
Yeah. For that, I usually actually work more with coaches on that end, because I think it comes from the culture that we're creating on the team. And it's funny because last year I spoke at the Junior MBA conference, and the topic was, what do you do when you have like one or two all-stars and the rest are not? And then they kind of do that. They kind of want to bring the all-stars down, or the all-stars kind of get, really pissed at the rest of the team. And we really talked about then that's where goal setting comes in as a team. Because I think if there's not clear goals for the team on a day-to-day basis, then there is too much room for that type of diversity that we don't want. That's too much of a gap. And the other thing is really for coaches to think about goal setting is great, but then there's also expectations. Expectations and goals are separate, and sometimes we really get those confused. Expectations are your bread and butter, day in, day out. Like, I expect you to be here at 5 p.m. A goal would be, 4:30 and you're shooting early. So I think sometimes though we get those really confused, and I would say that to me is more about, what coaches can do to create a culture where those expectations are clear. So those couple guys who are pushing harder are actually the motivators versus the other guys being like, I don't got that.
Yeah, you're so right, because it's such a people, every team always sits down at the start of the year. They have a team value session or a culture session, and everyone preaches that we've got good team culture, but there's just so much this, and when you've been in a team before, when the culture's spot on and right, and things are humming along, you're winning games, and culture's easy when you're winning, as you know. What else are some of the things that you spoke about with those NBA coaches? What were some of the other things that you touched on with them?
So what was cool about that conference is they actually have everyone from youth coaches all the way up. And I always tell people, always ask me okay, how much does it change? I say it doesn't. We just have to tweak it for the age group or the elite level. But the foundation is all really much the same. So another thing that I really encourage coaches to do is to get a core values list. You can print these off the internet and just Google it. I have one with 55 core values. And I'll meet with a coach and I'll have them, we'll go through a process. For dramatic sake, I say, get rid of 10, get rid of 5. And we get to our last 3. And I think that's really important for a coach to know, okay, I can't focus on 55 core values every day, but what we can do is we can do these 3 right. Then, though, what I have is I have the team do it. And then we see which ones overlap and which ones are separate, which ones can we maybe give or take. And what's funny is you'll see when the coach's message is clear, usually the team kind of picks very similar ones. And so that's one way to do it, is just start with that foundation, and what do those look like in action? Because that's the thing I see all the time, right? I'll be invited to work with a team. I'll walk into the locker room, and I think it will say family, hard work, or work ethic. It will have all these great words on the wall, integrity, and then I'll ask the guys and girls, okay, so how do I measure that on the field today? And they're like, So I think giving athletes, no matter what age, explicit expectations that way of what it looks like in action is so important for the team culture, because then I know what integrity looks like to you, and I know what it looks like to me then. And that bridges that lack of communication.
Yeah, and I love the point about what does the action look like, because what you explained there with the words up on the wall was basically every rugby training room here in New Zealand that you'd walk into would be the exact same. And I recently spent some time with a famous New Zealand rugby coach called Scott Robertson, and he met down with his leadership group and he spoke to them about being extremely aware of their body. And what he meant by that was whenever they're walking, as soon as they're getting out of their car in the parking lot, you are showing the team the values. If there's youth players around, they're seeing you how you're walking. what you're wearing and how you're acting. So I love that point about the values. When you mentioned about the 55, it brought back a lot of memories for me. I deal with a lot of social anxiety, and one of the coping strategies that was that exact task that you mentioned about finding out what your values were, and then when it does come on, you can line up, well, is this social gathering in line with my values? If it is, sweet, I've got to get there. And if it's not, sweet, I'm not going. That's so cool that you mentioned that. I suppose where I want to go now is, there is so much talk around at the moment about mental health. It's such a huge topic, and I feel like it's almost becoming a little bit trendy for people to say they've got certain things, depression, anxieties, and all this stuff. Are you seeing a real rise in a little bit of, I don't want to call it fake, but people saying they've got all these issues when it's actually not that big of an issue that they're dealing with? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think one of the things I try to separate by age too in development. And so a lot of my clients are what I like to say the golden age, 13 to 17, where these things are learnable. Most people say, oh God, you love that age. I love teenagers. But I think sometimes it's normal to have anxiety. It's normal to be bummed out. But what we're missing, and I can only speak for what I see in my area, is that we're not teaching them the tools to cope with it. And that goes back to expectations in sport too. I think our expectations sometimes of, even my high school athletes, they should not be having expectations of what my pro athletes should have. And so that part, to me, we're creating a culture of anxiety that's bigger than just each individual. And over here for us, the recruiting process to college is one of the most stressful times for the kids, the coaches, the families. So I think some of it's situational. I also think the other side, though, of true mental health, I think for a lot of times we thought like athletes don't have that. They're the tough ones per se. I've dealt with anxiety my whole life, and I was also, I would say, a really lucky one where lacrosse and my sports, that was an outlet for me. That was a safe place. That was a place where I could relieve some of that anxiety from school or whatever else. But I think it's really important for us to remember that sometimes that doesn't end it. It actually exasperates it based on the situation. So, for my pros, for example, like everyone thinks, oh, well, you guys got it easy. Like, no, now their whole livelihood is based on winning and losing. Or college coaches, I always say, I give them a ton of credit. Their whole livelihood and career is based on 18 to 21-year-olds. Like, you're giving up a lot of control. So I think we definitely have to do due diligence in separating, what's situational and then what is core mental health.
Yeah, I love what you just called that there, the golden age. I think it's putting it, and I've never heard it put so positively before, because that's such an incredible positive way to look at it, because you're exactly right. Like, there's so much more awareness about these mental pressures and anxiety, depression, and what you're saying there as well. Okay, cool. Let's identify as this is the golden age to actually give tools and ways of dealing with it. So I'm definitely going to steal that.
Go for it.
and explain it. I want to go back to some of the coaches, because we have a lot of coaches following our content. Who are some of the people that you've been inspired by and learnt a lot from their processes? I know you've had some pretty awesome experiences with the NBA and NFL. Is there some coaches that that have really impressed you and you've taken some gold from?
I'm trying to think here. Honestly, I would say the junior NBA conference the last 2 years has been great, because I've gotten to moderate, I've gotten to be on panels, and I have met so many coaches from across the entire US. But I love learning from the youth coaches, actually, because I think they're the ones who are like in it and they're in the deep end. They don't always have as many resources. So learning from their creativity and learning, what they kind of create back and forth with kids. I've never met Coach Saban, but I've had a lot of athletes who have played for Coach Saban. And he's one who I can say those boys come to me and they know, those young men are great young men and they know what their core values are. They know how to clearly execute them. So I would say like his coaching philosophy that way. I try to think who else.
That's absolutely perfect. I guess for a coach who's trying to make that next step with their career, they've been coaching at a certain level, they want to get into a professional environment, and they've been knocking on the door for a while. Would you have any advice for those people, and it sounds like you've worked with a couple now, for taking that next step with their coaching? That's kind of my question, is how do coaches take the next step to say, you know what, I'm ready to coach big time now?
I think one of the things I encourage most coaches to do is just like our athletes are always kind of perfecting their game, is to just get clarity around your coaching philosophy. Because the more clear you are on that, then that comes through more than questions of X's and O's. So what I mean by that, and I encourage all coaches to kind of have 3 or 4 pillars in their philosophy, which is obviously the skills and the physical component. And that's great. That's knowledge that we bring young athletes about the sport and training. Then the emotional piece, because that is vital, especially in team sports. Then kind of the social component, how, and that's more that culture, how you want to go ahead with that. And then the fourth, is kind of, people kind of create their own based on those. But I think getting really clear on why you do what you do, and at least having 3 pillars that you can define your goals in, then help get that message. And I think that whether it's interviewing for a job or being able to then talk to the next level of athlete, because that's one thing that athletes will sniff that out fast. So if you're going to the elite level, if you don't have that kind of stuff really clear and defined, then it's going to be a hard road.
Yeah, and I suppose that's almost becoming a specialist in a certain area. Do you see value, and would you give the advice for coaches, obviously in different sports, to become extremely knowledgeable in one area or part of the game and go really deep with something like that? Because I find when a coach knows the ins and outs, so for me, personal experience, my big thing is goal kicking here with rugby. So I've just gone so deep and tried to find out every little detail, how the body works. And from me, it's kind of... it's opened a few doors, because now all of a sudden I'm really detailed with something that I know a lot about, and I can add value, but then also show that my learning capabilities is I'm here to learn, I'm ready to go. So would that be something you'd recommend?
Yeah, I think for everyone, that's just a good modeling of, I know what I know and I can always learn more, and I'll bring in other specialties for that. So lacrosse is very similar. I was an attacker, offensively minded. I'm going to bring in someone to coach my team on defense or with goalie work. And I think that's just good modeling for the team too, to say, I can relate to you guys too. I'm still learning. And I think that's what I see a lot of times where teams go south, is because it's not teamwork with team and coach. When those are so separated, then that's not great. We have kind of disagreements, or team feels like they're not being heard. So when coach can kind of be relatable and say, hey, I'm not perfect, or I don't know everything, but I know this area, I just think it creates a better bond and understanding too, respect level that way.
So crucial. And I'm going to put some pressure on you now. So what's your specialty? What are you one of the best in the world at when it comes to this mindfulness?
I think my specialty is more the age group. So relating to teenagers for sure. A lot of people don't really want to work with that population. They are a handful. They call me out daily, but that's what I love. So I would say definitely working with that age group of athlete, because you never know what you're going to get. And with that said, that's when all the life pieces are really high stress too. So you could think you're going to, I'm going to have a session with so-and-so about their game last week. And they come in about school drama and schoolwork. And so I would say teenagers working with the adolescent population.
Yeah, awesome. And I suppose we're sort of coming up to close to the hour mark now. So I just want to wrap up with a few things. One question I did have down here was about the most common mistakes. And I guess, the most common mistakes that you're seeing athletes make with their preparation. I know we've touched on a lot already, but some take-home messages for people that have listened to this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
What are some things that they can take away and look to change in their life right now and get to work on with their mindset? Yeah,
I think one is just consistency. So whether that's how you're preparing, just make sure it's consistent. Pre-game routines, that's vital. The most simple is your breathing. Back to that mindfulness. I think breath work is one of the things I talk about the most, and belly breathing. And one of the things that most athletes do wrong in stressful situations, we start to take short, shallow breaths. So I think just some of those really simple things, and I hate to simplify my field because I think it's a great field, but at the end of the day, it really is small changes, big rewards. So these little things about preparing, I think, make a huge impact in the game. I've had people who just come to 1 or 2 sessions and see differences because of minor tweaks in the mental prep.
Oh, I totally agree, and I think that's the message of what detail is it doesn't have to be this big long-winded conversation or day in, day out. It's getting this tiny little helpful tool that can have such a huge effect. Inspiration. Where do you get inspiration from? Is there some podcast that you listen to, or some documentaries you've watched recently, or things you love to do? It's a question that we always ask on the podcast, is where are you drawing inspiration from right now?
Let's say I'm really fortunate. I work in a group practice, so I have weekly meetings with 10 other psychologists. I think that's really important. I'm going to totally jump on the Brené Brown train. I think she is great. She has a Netflix, she has a podcast, but I think a lot of her work about vulnerability applies perfectly to athletes. So I'm definitely inspired by her. And a lot of times I just am inspired by my own clients. I learn a lot from them as I go through this too. So I do have to say they keep me on my toes and learning.
Awesome. Hey, thanks so much, Devin. That is absolute gold today, and I've got a page full of notes. And the best thing about this podcast is you've added so much value to our listeners and take-home messages, and I think it's pretty remarkable some of the worlds and sport teams you've been exposed to. And I definitely think that we'll be catching up again, and you'll be back on the podcast and sharing some more stories of success. So thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Guys, thank you so much for listening to the Rugby Bricks podcast. If you found something valuable today that has benefited you and you think will help someone else in your environment, in your team, and your coaching staff, please feel free to share this podcast. I want to get as much knowledge as we can out to help players grow and become the best players and coaches that they can be. If you want other world-class knowledge and also programs, our kicking tee range, head to the Rugby Bricks website, rugbybricks.com, and also sign up for our newsletter. In the newsletter, we put out 5 really valuable pieces of information that contain skill tips, nutrition, strength and conditioning, and also a little bit on mindset. Every month we put out 5 of the top things that we've seen from around the internet and also from Rugby Bricks. Thank you again for listening to the Rugby Bricks podcast.